Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being with us today. Today is the second day of the webinar on soil health assessment tools. Yesterday, we introduced the topic and got to know about the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management and the BioFunk tool. Today, we will hear about the Biodiversity Integrated Assessment and Computation Tool, BINTACT, and the GSOC MRV protocol. And then we will discuss the possibility to use these and other tools in the region. Please recall that towards the end of the session, there will be the time to hear from you on the soil assessment tools and strategy that you usually use. I would like now to give the floor to the first speaker of the day, Ms. Zdravia Mamidanna, economist at FAO, that will tell us about the Biodiversity Integrated Assessment and Computation tool, BINTACT. Ms. Mamidanna, the floor is yours, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Lucrezia, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I can quickly begin by sharing my presentation. Let me know if you can see it right now. And okay then. All right, so thank you for this opportunity to present the Biodiversity Integrated Assessment and Computation tool, or in short, the BINTACT tool. As Lucrezia mentioned, I am Zdravia Mamidanna, and I work with the Agri-Food Economics and Policy Division at FAO as a climate change economist. And over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will provide, let's say, a brief overview of the BINTACT tool, introduce its methodology, some ongoing developments, present an example assessment, and towards the very end of the presentation, I would also provide a set of first ideas on how BINTACT can be used as a complementary tool for soil health assessments. And both during and after the presentation, please feel free to ask questions and interact. Right, so the BINTACT tool sits among the exact suite of tools together at the Economic and Policy Analysis of Climate Change team within ESA division of FAO. There are three main tools: EXACT for assessing GHG emissions from agriculture production, which maybe most of you are familiar with. And there is an EXACT for value chains that assesses GHG emissions from downstream value chain activities, and the BINTACT, which evaluates the biodiversity impact of project interventions in the agriculture sector. So today we focus on the BINTACT tool, whose main objective is, let's say, to cater to the increasing efforts to mainstream biodiversity concerns when designing projects and policies, and also to sort of ensure conservation efforts are integrated into investments and hence support some of the goals and targets of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And we aim to contribute by providing a pragmatic and an operational framework using sound and scientifically sound metrics and making them as accessible as possible. So in its current version, you can think of BINTACT tool as a land-based accounting tool that quantifies the terrestrial biodiversity impacts of investments, projects, policies in the FOLO sector using both a quantitative and a qualitative approach. So the quantitative assessment of the current tool is adapted from the GloBio model 3.6 terrestrial biodiversity methodology. That in itself is based on a set of quantitative pressure impact relationships of species and pressures. So it looks into different groups of animals, species like mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and terrestrial invertebrates, and some of the vascular plants, and tries to understand how these interact and how their abundance affects biodiversity concerns. And the qualitative assessment focuses on, let's say, contextualizing other biodiversity concerns which do not yet have a robust methodology to sort of simulate with project or without project or intended outcomes. So the main indicator of the BeanTag tool is something called the mean species abundance. So within the BeanTag tool, MSA is estimated as a function of 4 anthropogenic impacts or pressures, which are land use, infrastructure disturbance, habitat fragmentation, and human encroachment. So particularly important in the context of soil health assessment is land use and habitat fragmentation, which we will touch upon much later in the presentation. But I just wanted to highlight that these two factors play a critical role in defining the mean species abundance as a major indicator for biodiversity intactness. So the MSA indicator basically ranges between 0 and 1. And you can think of it as an indicator that represents the health of an ecosystem, right? So a healthy ecosystem will have a high MSA, while a degraded ecosystem will have a low MSA. So higher the value of MSA, better the ecosystem health. And it's a simple indicator which is science-based and also practical to report, and its results are comparable across projects or policies or investments, and it reflects the magnitude of impact of these on biodiversity and ecosystems health. Of course, MSA also has its limitations. It doesn't take into account something called the ecological value of the assessment site. So, for example, in some instances, like a forest and a desert can both be considered as a completely undisturbed ecosystem, which is not the same as however, conservation efforts, for instance, in forests may be more relevant than in the case of deserts, right? So in that way, MSA also has its limitations about accounting for ecological value or ecosystem services value of a certain land use category. And also MSA is basically a relative measure which expresses the abundance of original species in a disturbed habitat compared to their abundance in an undisturbed habitat. So basically it's trying to measure to which extent an ecosystem is intact. Moving on, the tool also currently estimates two other quantitative indicators. The first one is the MSA per hectare, which basically quantifies the extent of biodiversity loss or gain resulting from the investment project or policy. What do I mean by this? Let's say the MSA per hectare is 500, right? So then how you can interpret this is that the investment or project results in 100% loss of MSA in 500 hectares. That is, it basically destroyed 500 hectares of a fully healthy ecosystem into a degraded one, and therefore the biodiversity, there's a biodiversity loss. The second indicator is the added social value of biodiversity, which is basically a monetary value of ecosystem services, which is retrieved using a simple benefit transfer function from something called the Ecosystem Services Valuation Database, and it is adjusted to the MSA value within the project site and provided as a valuable policy indicator. The qualitative assessment, in a nutshell, looks at whether the project is in or near a key biodiversity area, for example, or a protected area, and looks at whether a particular project to provide guidance on potential risks of project activities. So it also allows users to understand the sort of agrobiodiversity or biodiversity sensitivity based on the share of water stress or threatened species, or based on the project activities that could directly have an impact on agrobiodiversity. So this is a set of 16 questions that a project team must answer, and it's mainly qualitative in nature. However, we are also working on this section of the tool, so I will not go into further details and move next to present you a first overall view of what it means to perform a BeanTag assessment. So a typical biodiversity assessment using the tool begins with like setting the context. So that means you're identifying all the relevant project activities that may have an impact on biodiversity and ecosystem health. This could, in the context of soil health related interventions, mean improving at a landscape level, let's say degraded grasslands, right? Or even at a farm scale level, let's say it could be moving from extensive cropland to intensive cropland. So things like that could be defined as project activities that are fit to perform a biodiversity assessment. And once you establish these different project activities, the assessment is completely geospatial in nature. So it requires geospatial data such as basically the shapefile of the project area, and the land use and the land cover data sets, infrastructure layers that can include dams, roads, and so on. Of course, the more local the layers, either at the national level or the regional level, better the results of the assessment. However, currently we use global data sets which have fairly good resolution to make sure that the local nuances are also considered well. And we then perform a scenario building exercise, first estimating MSA at the baseline level, and then sort of manipulating the land use, land cover layers based on the project activities. So in the next few slides, maybe I can quickly show you one of our recent case studies. So we have performed a BEANTACT assessment for a project with IFAD called RECAF, which aimed at reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. This was in Vietnam. And after reading the project documents, two key activities were identified that we could evaluate within the BEANTACT tool. And this included activities that targeted deforestation and basically forest management. So improving the degradation levels within a forest management setup. So once we identified the activities, we collected sort of all the necessary geospatial data. So in this case, we use the ESA CCI land use, land cover data, but also the National Forest Inventory and Monitoring Program data set from Vietnam, which included 12 different forest classes. And additionally, information on degradation levels where available were incorporated. And in the WITH project scenario, we have ensured like sort of tailored allocation criteria to account for the number of hectares targeted by the project for each relevant activity, and also per type of land cover in each province. But in this case, we were really lucky to have such disaggregated data, and most of the times we do understand that projects might not have such clear disaggregated data available all the time. So that's why we also have global data sets then, which will come in handy to perform a quick BEANTACT assessment. So once we geospatialize the WITH project scenario or the WITH project interventions across the project area, the tool sort of provides a set of outputs comparing the baseline and the WITH project scenario. And this is how the quantitative indicators and qualitative indicators are represented in the current format of the tool. So these include mainly quantitative, as you can see in this particular assessment, the overall MSA doesn't change. However, when you look closer, you also realize that due to a reduction in deforestation and forest management and better forest management practices, there is an ever slight increase in the ecosystem health related to the pressure of land use. So it moves from, let's say, 0.5985 to 0.5988. And even such a slight increase can help in preserving intact ecosystem health on close to 351 hectares, which is huge when you put things into perspective. And the added social value of biodiversity is close to $700,000 US, which of course I really need to make it very transparent that it is a direct benefit transfer function that we are using right now, which implies that the number is either biased upward or downward, and it requires fine-tuning to understand exactly how to interpret that number. And as mentioned, you can also see the qualitative indicators, which are just representative of the context of the project. I would maybe also like to quickly provide you an overview about the ongoing developments of the tool. So currently the tool is in an Excel format, which is not entirely user-friendly because it requires the user to perform geospatial processing in standard GIS software, and then it might not be the most convenient for everyone. But however, over the last 1 year, we have moved towards fully automated geospatial BeanTact assessments, where a user can simply draw an area of interest on the map and develop with project scenarios. And we are still working on it, and we hope to release it to all the users pretty soon. And the results from the assessments will also be useful across the project cycle, especially during planning, as we take like a hybrid approach of understanding also patch level dynamics. I think it's important, especially in the context of soil health assessment, to consider patch dynamics because they make critical contributions to biodiversity and also reflect soil degradation or sensitivity, which I will talk in the slides following this. But maybe I can also quickly show you how the results will be presented in the upcoming tool. So you can see that we present the results at a patch level and provide unique IDs for each patch. So patch is basically a homogeneous land use group in the area, right? And you can look at its particular characteristics. So for example, its land use class, the total area of that patch, total infrastructure, or the number of number of dams or the kilometers of roads present in that particular patch, and along with MSA and ecosystem services value. So this set of results helps projects and policies to better target areas of intervention, for example, based on both MSA, but also patch dynamics, so that maybe you want to invest in infrastructure like construction of roads. And if you understand that there are patches of land which belong to forest together or which belong to a certain land use category together, it helps to preserve the patch integrity by going around the patch to build the infrastructure rather than through it. And these kind of things can provide you some ideas to better target areas of intervention, for example. Of course, this requires still an operational guidance and framework sort of to prioritize and so on. And we are currently working towards that. So we're also simultaneously working on methodological improvements across different modules. So this include terrestrial biodiversity, so improving land use and ecosystems, geospatial layers for granularity. And one main area of progress has also been improving the monetary evaluation that we provide for ecosystem services. And we are doing this by using a state-of-art spatially explicit meta-analysis to have a more nuanced transfer functions. Similarly, we are also advancing on including both freshwater and marine biodiversity modules into the BeanTact tool to provide sort of an end-to-end assessment. And particularly freshwater biodiversity could also be indirectly linked to soil health in a way that how the nutrients deplete and nutrient management is important in this context. So coming back to the agenda of the day of this webinar, I would like to end this presentation sharing some first ideas of how MSA can act as a complementary indicator for soil health. So there's, of course, a recognized link between biodiversity and soil health. So higher biodiversity often correlates with healthier soils because, you know, the 6 groups that the MSA calculates in its impact pressure relationships can contribute to nutrient cycling, soil structure, and organic matter decomposition. However, this relationship is quite complex and extremely nonlinear, and is of course influenced by numerous sort of environmental or other anthropogenic factors, including nitrogen deposition, for example, which currently the BeanTag tool does not account for. But however, I still think that, for example, I'm sorry, for example, a decline in species abundance can indicate some ecosystem stress, which may affect soil health. So it doesn't, let's say, directly measure soil properties, but it still provides valuable information about the state of biodiversity, which is indirectly related to soil health. And also because the BeanTag takes into account patch size dynamics, this can really be an important ecological metric that can put soil degradation or soil health in a landscape perspective, and not just at the farm or site level. So this will also sort of enhance the landscape approach to soil health and not just a site scale approach. And with that said, I have come to the conclusion of my presentation, and will be happy to hear any feedback or thoughts or questions you may have, and more of the feedback from you, because it's like I said, biodiversity and soil health relationship is complex and nonlinear, but it's important to initiate this discussion and see how it can be a complementary assessment for soil health. So thank you so much for your attention, and back to you, Lucrezia.
Many thanks, Zdravia, for your very good presentation. It was very, very interesting to listen. Of course, we are opening the floor for questions. You can write them in the question and answer box, but you can also raise your hand and ask them live. We have time for that. So please feel free to do so. Meanwhile, I would like to break the ice by asking you just a couple of very practical questions. So the first one is there any cost implied in using this tool?
No,
and how can people access it?
Sure, thank you so much for that question. So it's a freely available tool for anyone to access. So right now we have the Excel version, which is available online at our website, but we are also migrating to a web application soon. So that will also be available for everyone to use it for free. And I'm sorry, I missed the second part of your question.
Yeah, it was how to access it. Like they just go to the website and download it?
Yes, you just need to register to download the tool.
And does your office offer any support in case people need help in using it, since you said it's not very user-friendly at present?
Sure, absolutely. Right now, we are always available to answer any questions that you may have. You can reach out to us, any of us on the team that you see here, but yeah, even through our website directly.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any question coming through, but I would like to ask you to please keep an eye, especially to the question and answer box, because very often participants have to digest all this information and take time to write their questions. So if you can please keep an eye, and again, everybody, please feel free to ask any question you might have. Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much again, Zdravia, for your very good presentation. I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Michaela Brown, Soil and Climate Change Consultant at the Global Soil Partnership of FAO, that will introduce us to the GSOC MRV protocol. I take this opportunity to remind you that this protocol was presented also at the webinar on carbon financing that took place in November last year. So today we will look at this tool under a slightly different angle, but just for your information, I will share the link to the recording of the other webinar in the chat. And while doing so, I give the floor to Michela. So Michela, over to you, and thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to present the GSOC MRV protocol. And as Lucrezia mentioned, this has been presented, so I'll dive deep again and hopefully it'll all line up. So without further ado, I'll jump into what the GSOC MRV protocol is, how it was formed, and how we use it within the Global Soil Partnership. So the GSOC MRV was originally created to align the carbon sequestration projects, mostly under the title of RecSoil, the Recarbonization of Global Soils Initiative, which is what I work with in the GSP, to align those projects to the carbon market. So it enables all of those projects to meet pretty strict regulations of monitoring, measuring, reporting, and verification required for those projects to align with carbon standards. But in practical purposes and what this means, it does give a very robust set of metrics and regulations for measuring and monitoring carbon sequestration after the implementation of sustainable soil management practices. So this provides a standard methodology for evaluating soil carbon stocks and other agricultural emissions that may be reduced or removed when sustainable practices are implemented. Some of the key points of creating this framework was that it's only applicable to certain lands. I'll go into why those decisions were made in a few slides. Then the time frame is a minimum of 8 years. As I'm sure many of you know, it takes quite a bit of time for soil carbon stocks to stabilize in soils and to see changes in soil carbon stocks after SSM implementation. This also follows a general methodology where we will have standardized and harmonized metrics that we take so we have a consistent baseline or point of comparison across different projects. We employ soil models to evaluate soil carbon, which I'll also get into, and use IPCC equations that are known constants instead of modeling for other greenhouse gas removals and reductions. And this has periodic auditable reports so that it adds a standard accountability to the GSOC MRV protocol. And over 200 experts contributed to this document. It was an iterative process, so it really had a lot of inputs and contributions from leading experts. So the key stages of applying the MRV protocol, first, as mentioned, there are only certain types of land that this protocol is eligible to apply to. Then after ineligible lands are filtered out, specific project boundaries are established. Then the baseline versus intervention scenarios are defined. I'll define that terminology a little bit later on, but essentially baseline is what would happen without the project or without the implementation of sustainable soil management. Next, we look into additionality. I'll also speak to that later, but this is essentially without this project, would these sustainable soil management practices have been applied? Then we look at the implementation of the selected practices and how to monitor their impact on emissions and soil carbon stocks. Then finally, all of the data collected is compiled into reports and can be verified by a third party if the objective of the project is to go into the carbon market. And the GSOC MRV gives instruction on how to do that. So first, looking at the applicability of the protocol, the eligible and restricted lands. The main purpose of this is to exclude lands that might be harmed or might emit greenhouse gases if sustainable soil management practices were implemented. So these include wetlands and peatlands, any land that has undergone significant land use change over the past 10 years. This includes organic soils that disturbing the soil might lead to the emission of greenhouse gases. Then also any current native forest land or lands that have undergone land use change or deforestation over the past 10 years. Because again, those would not be the preferred lands to implement SSM practices on. Then we select which practices would be implemented on the project area. So there are a set of eligible practices that have to fall into these categories in order to be measured and standardized by the GSOC MRV protocol. This is largely due to carbon market restrictions and making sure that all of the practices implemented through the GSOC MRV protocol would eventually line up with the carbon market. But these practices have a really wide range of applicability and can be tailored to the specific project area. So even though they fall in set categories, we have further tools to show how these practices can be tailored to specific lands. And for this, we have the RecSoil Technical Manual, which provides hundreds of case studies of how these specific practices can be applied to project areas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase soil carbon stocks to improve overall soil health. So this can be a really practical user guide to amending certain practices to fit within the GSOC MRV. Next, after ineligible lands have been excluded, the practices have been applied, we define specific project boundaries. So in order to define project boundaries, certainly up to this point, a certain land would have been in mind, but now in order to apply the measuring, monitoring, and verification process, a very specific parcel of land needs to be spatially defined. And for this, we break the project areas into intervention areas. And this essentially means that each specific intervention area within the target project area will have similar sustainable soil management intervention practices. And these intervention areas may be one or several farms, but it also might be one farm that has a couple different areas of implementation. So for example, if there's a farm that has rotational grazing and wants that to be a intervention area and then has another piece that would be cropland, those would be grouped into separate intervention areas. And this really streamlines the evaluation, the measuring and monitoring, because we need to evaluate like with like. So I'll go into kind of how we define the sampling strategy to measure changes in soil carbon stock a little bit later, but just to say for now, we use Earth observation data and on the ground data to define project boundaries and look at comparable spatial units. Then after defining the specific project areas, we'll define the baseline versus intervention scenario. And as stated, the baseline scenario is what would have happened on the project area if the project were not introduced. So in this case, the project would be the introduction of sustainable soil management practices. And typically for a baseline scenario, we would look for lands that had not had, this is where the additionality piece comes in. Often to define eligible project areas, we look for lands where the historical management would have either not had sustainable soil management practices or would have had a low level, and the introduction of sustainable soil management could increase soil carbon stocks and reduce agricultural emissions. So for that, we take historical management data to see what's currently going on, what has been going on in this project area, and can the introduction of SSM improve soil health and reduce greenhouse gas emissions? For this, we will also use soil models to predict, based on this management data, over the next 20 years, what would the soil carbon stock in the soil be without the introduction of sustainable soil management? And when we introduce SSM practices, how can soil carbon stocks increase and how can greenhouse gas emissions decrease? And moving on to the soil sampling design, this is maybe the most technically robust part of the GSOC MRV protocol, as if anyone has been experienced in trying to evaluate the change in soil carbon stocks, you'll know that sampling is probably the most important piece of this, because soil carbon can vary so drastically even within one single field. So the approach that we tend to take is, or that's outlined in the GSOC MRV protocol, is stratified sampling. So we have kind of two options of stratified random sampling and stratified static sampling. So for the stratified random sampling, and I'll define what stratified is here, we continue to use those analogous project areas defined in the intervention areas mentioned a few slides ago. And here we break down those intervention areas into different strata. So these strata would be defined by soil type, which can change even within a few feet within a field, and different slope or terrain or other conditions that may impact the soil carbon stock in a particular area within the field. Then we work within composite samples. So we have two paths there, either the simple random design that you see in the top left, and that would be a dynamic sampling strategy in which we would not take soil samples from the exact same location every time. But then we tend to recommend the static sampling in which certain sampling points are defined and revisited in order to minimize the spatial and temporal variation, so that we know this particular point has been impacted by the management changes, because even if you sample a few feet away, there could be variation that isn't only explained by the implementation of the sustainable soil management practice. So when our team gives training on the GSOC MRV protocol to project participants, we really go into the detail of how to use Earth observation tools to define these strata, and then define a sampling strategy that would give clear indications of how sustainable soil management impacts carbon stocks over time. Then we look into, once we've defined the sampling strategy, we actually take the data and analyze the soil samples. And as mentioned, we have a few different parameters that we measure with the GSOC MRV. Always necessary are soil carbon percent, that's the soil organic carbon, and the bulk density. We use these to calculate the tons of carbon per hectare in the soil, adjusted by equivalent soil mass. And this is essentially just adjusting and accounting for bulk density to see the total carbon in soil. And again, this is all just to reiterate how sustainable soil management impacts soil carbon. Then we can also look at particulate organic carbon. This is optional, but as this particular organic carbon has a different stability in the soil, it's helpful to parse out, in certain instances, the proportion of particulate organic carbon versus the rest of the carbon in the soil. So that's an option that some project participants can take, but certainly we'll always take organic carbon, bulk density, and calculate carbon stocks based on that. So then for the soil sampling itself, we've also standardized this within the GSOC MRV protocol so that all projects have a standard sampling methodology and harmonized sampling methods so that all the results are comparable. So we can really see how exactly SSM practices are impacting soil carbon stocks. And to do this optimally, we would sample up to 100 centimeters, but a minimum of 30 centimeters sampling depth is required. And then we sample always at the baseline so we can tell the starting soil carbon stocks. Sampling, if project participants desire to sample every 2 years, that option's available, but it can take a long time for soil carbon stocks to change, so this is not mandatory. But every 4 years, sampling is mandatory, so we continue to have the consistency and data points. And then in order to evaluate those parameters that we take the soil samples for, we use our GLOSOAN SOPs. Again, this is to add harmonization and standardization so we can compare projects to each other, but we can also ensure accurate and precise lab results. Then finally, we use all of this data and compile it into predictions of greenhouse gas removals and reductions over time, both in carbon sequestration into the soil, but then also we measure different agricultural emissions. So we look at enteric fermentation, manure and manure management, fertilizers, crop residue, burning, and fuel. And within these, we will look at CO2, nitrous oxide, and methane across all of these categories. And for soil carbon, as mentioned, we use soil dynamic models. So this is something like Roth-C, but no specific model is mandated by the GSOC MRV, but we do go step by step in how to use Roth-C. Though if project participants would prefer to use another, the GSOC MRV certainly gives that flexibility. Then for the other agricultural emissions, we use IPCC equations with known constants. These can be tailored to be more specific in a tier 2 manner, so integrating project or site-specific data. We currently use the EXACT tool to calculate these other emissions that do not fall into the SOC category. And then we can show, as in this graph, improved management has reduced greenhouse gas emissions by X amount. Then all of those results are worked into a final report and can go through a verification process, which I won't get into now as this is often conducted by a third party, but the GSOC MRV takes the project participant from project area selection, practice implementation, soil sampling and monitoring, and then how to predict the greenhouse gases reduced and removed through the implementation of sustainable soil management. And that is the GSOC MRV. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michela. It was very good presentation. Before asking you some questions, to answer some question live, I would like to ask a question to Zdravia, because actually there was a question for her, but it was raised in the chat box. So the question is the following, Zdravia, yes. So do you have any facility to online train the new practitioners on how to use this tool?
That's a great question. We currently do not have something for FAO staff, but we have, so this has mostly been applied in the context of rec soil. So we have our rec soil trainings that we would train project participants. Is that what you mean? Do we currently have an online training kind of either publicly available or for FAO staff? Is that what you
Maybe,
mean?
I don't know, under some other FAO initiatives, we organize like webinars or like online trainings that we record and then share, like sort of what we are doing now, just in a bit more practical way. Do you also have something like that that we can share with participants to this webinar or any upcoming online training opportunity?
I don't know off the top of my head if we have something recorded and ready to go. Let me look into that because I know this is mostly kind of the detailed training with all of the Earth observation and stratification and all of that has mostly been within the context of rec soil. So I will have to look into that and get back to you if we have something ready to share.
Thanks, Michela. What about you, Zdravia?
Thank you, Lucrezia. So we do have online material, but as I said, we've upgrading to a new web application soon. So we plan to release that in the next quarter somehow, and then we would have more resources available. But until then, any of the EXACT team is available for bilateral exchange of knowledge on the tool and how to use them. But we also have regular trainings, and some of this material is available as webinars, which we can share personally if interested. And I also noticed another question, but maybe I will directly answer it in the Q&A box so that Michaela can take over the SOC questions. Thank you, Lucrezia.
We have time to answer the questions live if you like. So I would suggest to do so that we also maybe trigger some discussion and start involving participants. Zdravia, in your case, can you send me some links that I can include to my email to all register participants so they can access this material? Or also, if you already know where the new material will be published, we can include the webpage in the email.
Sure, absolutely. I will do that.
Okay, thanks. So indeed, let's start taking some question live. Maybe let me start with you, Michela. The first one, do you add carbon sequestered in trees standing on the soil where carbon in soil is recorded?
Yeah, that's a great question. So given that we use EXACT for the SOC sequestration. And correct me if I'm wrong with the intricacies of the exact tool, there is the option to measure biomass. But this is an optional parameter of the GSOC MRV. So this will be included in the exact results, but I would have to confirm exactly with all of the exact parameters, but this is certainly an option.
Thank you. And then if you know the soil landscape and sample homogeneous area, why the protocol uses standard depth instead of generic horizon depth?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's mostly to, I mean, I am looking at the first question as well in terms of bulk density, and I'll get to that. But I think anyone who's worked in trying to standardize carbon methods knows that there's a million ways to slice it. So for this in particular, the standard sampling depths are to add a minimum standard so that we know that practitioners aren't necessarily taking 10 centimeter samples and calling that representative of the carbon stocks. It's to add a minimum level of scrutiny. So knowing that project participants were already trying to tailor it quite specifically through the stratification and sampling design. And so this is kind of a medium ground in terms of minimum rigor that we're looking for with at least 30 centimeters depth, but then also making it still able to implement for the project participants, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So you said that you already read the first question. It was very long. That's why I kept it as the last one. Do you want to answer it? Maybe
Yeah.
let me read it loud for everybody. So we are considering bulk density as one of the parameters to calculate SOC stock. As you're aware, this parameter is dynamic, which may lead to overestimation or underestimation of stock SOC. Do you suggest implementing a robust and affordable methodology to avoid this situation?
Yeah, and I would say, again, with both the standardization, but also for bulk density in particular, this is why we would tend to gravitate towards the static sampling stations so that any variations in bulk density, even though it's dynamic, we try to standardize as much as possible and limit the number of varying factors. So with the static sampling stations, we can say that even though bulk density is variable, sustainable soil management practices may impact this particular spot of land in this way. So even though we can't account for every single potential variation of soil organic carbon and all the factors that account for soil organic carbon, really the point of this is to add as much standardization as possible and make the results as consistent as possible, knowing that measuring soil organic carbon, there are many factors, not just bulk density, that make it a very, very difficult indicator to measure.
Thank you very much, Michela, and thank you very much, Zdravia. Indeed, yes. Let me allow Omar to take the floor. Mr. Daragme, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting webinar. I'm really the one who raised this question in regard of the bulk density as a parameter to calculate the stock. It's not just a non-significant parameter. It is one of the most significant parameter when we are calculating the stock. So is there any methodology? Is there any approach? There is, for example, the mass equivalent approach, but I don't know if it is easy to be handled for by normal user or by normal farmers. This is why I'm raising this question. Really, it's an important because when we are doing this MRV, the stock is one of the issues that we are depending on. If there is an overestimation or underestimation, especially after a while when we are running the project, verifying the project, comparing the verified stock with the baseline may will underestimate or overestimate the stock.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree. And actually, this is one of the reasons. So the Rec Soil Initiative has shifted mostly from trying to engage in carbon trading to focusing on soil health in general. And bulk density can give an indication of soil health overall, even though it's dynamic and may lead to fluctuations in carbon stock. So as you mentioned, with measuring carbon stock and integrating it into carbon trading, getting accurate carbon stocks is one of the most difficult and highest barriers to entry that we've found as well. And to your point, we do think some of the other metrics were too difficult to implement on the ground and in the existing pilot projects. So unfortunately, I cannot say that we have cracked the code for easily and affordably measuring accurate carbon stocks at this point. Yeah.
Sorry, I was I was reading the chat. There might be a question from Thailand. Dr. Pitayakon, I don't know if you want to ask your question live, because I just ask you if you can please reformulate it. If so, let me give you the floor. So maybe you can tell us a bit more also on what's happening in Thailand.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think FAO also worked so many matter about this one, and I also thinking that it many parameter is still complicated for some researcher, and maybe it's still dynamic. So I think it's still very difficult to something like to make the stable data on that one. That is my idea on that. But I think maybe in my country, it more parts of the carbon in the soils. It will be something like not stable and maybe difficult in the same area, something like that. That is also dynamic. So that is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pitayakon. All fine from your side, Michela? You want to rebut?
I actually quite agree that soil carbon is incredibly dynamic and difficult to pin down. So that's somewhat why we use these methods, but then shift to a focus on overall soil health as integrating exact measurements for something like soil carbon that is so incredibly dynamic is we can approximate it and we can have the best methods that we can with the given technology, but as anyone who's worked in soil carbon knows, incredibly difficult indicator to pin down. So
indeed, there is a comment from Thomas in the Q&A that said that I believe that whatever action we do for carbon sequestration in soil, we reflect on the biomass. So soil carbon sequestration alone may not benefit for carbon trading.
I totally agree, Thomas. Yeah.
Is there anyone else willing to take the floor and maybe tell us what you are doing to assess the soil health in your country? In addition to what was presented, I have actually some polls for you to see if you already maybe knew and use these tools that were presented these days. But maybe before doing that, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us about your experience working on soil health assessment. We broke the ice, don't be shy. We give you the floor. Yes, Thomas, please.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa and Savia and Michaela for giving a beautiful presentation on very important topic. In fact, I am in a very we work with farmers in Western Ghats of India, that's South India, which is a highly biodiversity sensitive area, one of those very biodiversity hotspots in India and 9th in the world, in fact. But my question is always that, mostly forest ecosystem is one side, and once with the agriculture coming in, people have already converted the forest to the agricultural land. Now the efforts, we are trying to make it into a agro ecosystem, wherein some of those lost species, trees, etc., could be reintroduced in the agro ecosystem. But then two challenges we have is the land holding for farmer is very small here. Maybe average land holding is 1 hectare. So even asking them to farmers to leave bio fencing itself is a big issue, because they are looking at some 10 cents of land is being lost by another biodiversity thing. So what we are trying to do is somehow we evolve a system wherein whatever we do in terms of carbon sequestration or biodiversity bring directly some money to the pockets of the farmer. I mean, philosophically, they may accept, but they never do anything. But unless and until you bring in some money, that's what our last 3-4 years we have been trying to do that. And carbon trading so far is a failure. We couldn't really make any trading out of the carbon sequestered because it's very complex. But one thing we have noted is that some of those actions on biodiversity, which is also reflecting on the soil. Of course, we only trace the organic carbon. We never thought of the bulk density. That is one approach I have learned from you, Michael. But only as somebody told, the issue is we have a very high rainfall. So the bulk density is again fluctuating, with a landslide and with the heavy monsoon bulk density. But at least some action on conserving soil carbon by using some of those vetiver grass in planting and in interplanting and some cover crops taking on. That is found to be very good. I mean, slightly after. Well, I think the results, at least we are getting results only after 4 years, not even 2 years. We don't find any change in the organic carbon. But I think this is the right direction, wherein people, if we are able to bring in some direct benefit to the farming community, then it becomes a success. So that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to educate the consumers and the community that there is a lot of ecosystem services being provided by the farming community. So kindly pay for it. Yeah, this is just mostly a political talk rather than a practical thing happening. No extra money is happening. But anyway, thank you so much. It has been wonderful. And thank you, Lusra, giving me the platform to talk.
My pleasure. Thanks for sharing. We take another one. Next one would be Jegan Sekar. I'm allowing you to talk now.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are from MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. We have been working in several agro ecosystems in South India, especially working with farmers and maintaining or managing soil health. From our perspective, right now, it is mostly crop oriented. So it is soil testing for major nutrients like NPK. In some places, we are going for micronutrients. And soil organic matter is one of the parameter in which. So slightly we are now thinking towards sustainable soil quality index kind of thing. So the production systems are changing from sustainable agriculture to natural farming, organic farming kind of thing. So in such context, the existing methodology may not be fitting. So towards soil quality index as a kind of a comprehensive measure, we would like to, focus in that, including physical, chemical, and biological components. We would like to focus. So on this line, we may need technical support from expertise from different parts of country where such practices have been in they are practicing right now, and how it can be taken forward to other regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagan. Did you attend yesterday's session? There was a tool that was very interesting called BioFunk tool.
Yes, yeah. We have attended the yesterday session as well.
I think that can be of good use for you.
Sure, yeah, we will consult further on this.
Yeah, at the end of today's session, I will share all the material and also the email addresses of the panelists so you can engage with them directly. And Alexis will be very happy to engage in a discussion with you on how to use the BioFunk tool in India. I'm sure about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Graham Lancaster, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Excellent. Just a perspective from Australia, we've been doing this soil carbon monitoring now for many, many years. Currently in the small lab I work at the university in Southern Cross University in Lismore, we're doing about 30,000 soils by combustion analysis this year. So it's 30,000 of acid treatment, LECO combustion. So we've got 5 LECO machines and we just can't keep up with the amount of samples that are going through. They've done a lot of work in the field to really get that sample collection down to a precise art. And they often do the bulk density down the core by taking an intact core and separating it out into the 0 to 30 centimetres. We weigh that in the lab, and the 30 centimetres to a metre where we dry and weigh that in the lab as the bulk density. So we have the core diameter, we have the details there, and that's been working very well. We've got to pick out the gravel and the organic matter. Then we've got to do a big compassing of that large volume of material as per the guidelines in Australia. So a hell of a lot of work, but I think they've got it down to a pretty good art now that we are getting reliable numbers. They're going back to farms 5 years later. So we've been doing it for over 5 years and getting good consistency or fluctuations and in a lot of cases increases in carbon. So just an example from Australia, but yeah, it's happening all over the country now. It's a bloody big country.
That's amazing. Encouraging to hear that after all that work, it's consistent results. Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
We haven't talked about NIR, near infrared, as well. A lot of our clients are doing near infrared every 5 centimetres down a core using field near infrared technology that they've developed in-house. And then we're just doing the validation by total organic carbon LECO of those profile cores, so that even though we might be analysing 30,000 soils, they're analysing hundreds of thousands of points using near infrared and also satellite technology. So there's a lot of technology built into it and a lot of this customised. They're spending maybe 300,000 or 400,000 Australian dollars on these NIR field techniques. So there's a lot happening, and I think it's going to go a long way in the future. But there's a lot of people also nervous about how much money they could make or how much they could lose if they reverse it and they lose carbon the following 5 years or something. So it's a risky game, but as you said, the main thing I encourage is all about promoting management techniques for regenerative agriculture. We teach that at Southern Cross University here, and it's all about trying to improve your carbon, because the benefits aren't just the carbon credits. It's really about the benefits to your resilience as a farm. Like, I could talk all day, but I won't.
Actually, I'm thinking to invite you as a speaker to one of the upcoming webinar if you're available.
I'm available, but I'd never shut up, so I'm probably no good.
To hear more about it, it's very interesting. And indeed, technology, we have to look into technology and technology transfer also, to all these countries that are in need to lower cost as well. Thank you so much, Graham.
No.
Anyone else is willing to share their experience? What are you doing in your country? Maybe, as you see, I can invite you to be the next speaker at one of the upcoming webinars. No one else? Then maybe, yes, one more. Nagesh? We cannot hear you. And still we cannot hear you. Try? I heard
Yeah.
something. Yes, now
Hello.
yes. Yes,
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you. So basically, I'm the associate manager working for mainly a carbon modeling purpose. We are using ROTC carbon model for mainly for carbon especially. But as I seen this sustainable soil management, really it helps me understanding the increment of our carbon and helping the farmers to be towards more sustainable. Thanks for conducting the webinar.
Thanks to you and thanks for sharing. Michaela Zdravia, any follow-up comment? Nagesh, can you tell us again, what is your country, please?
I am from India, Bangalore.
Okay, good, well noted. Thanks for sharing. Okay, anyone else? If not, I would like to ask you a few questions before moving toward the closure of the webinar. Oh, I see that Jegan might want to talk again. Jegan, please.
Good morning. I'm also from MSSRF. Yesterday, that Biofunk tool was very interesting. I would like to know if you would organize any workshop or training exclusively on using this Biofunk tools, because we are working with a lot of farmers, more than lakh farmers, to and also have created a lot of soil data, physical, biochemical, chemical, to some extent even the biological data. But how do we apply this and adopt this Biofunk tool? If exclusive training can be organized, that will be really helpful for us to take
Yeah,
it to the next step.
Yeah, sounds wise. Indeed, if you can send me an email so I don't lose your contact, we can explore this possibility with Alexis, so CIRAD and IRD. They work in a number of countries. As Alexis presented yesterday, they have projects also related to the use of the Biofunk tool. And I know that sometimes they organize some training session outside of their project. In relation maybe to other activities or depending on the interests that there are in the region. So yeah, if you can send me an email, we can move forward with discussing this possibility.
Is FAO having any activities in India? We are not aware of
FAO
it.
has a lot of activities in India, but not specifically on this tool, Biofunk tool. But we can explore possibilities to initiate something.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be great.
Just the tool is with CIRAD and IRD. So if you're interested in these two specifically, FAO can facilitate the discussion and we can support in putting something together tailored on your needs.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
To you. Okay, now, as I said, let me ask you a few questions before thanking you for being with us over these 2 days. So the first question is the following. Have you ever heard about the tools presented in this webinar? It's a multiple choice question, so you can select more than one options. So have you ever heard about the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management, or Biofunk tool, or BINTACT, or the GSOC MRV protocol? Or maybe you never heard about any of this one. Let's see. I am about to close the poll. Please, Harry, if you didn't answer already. Okay, and in the poll, it looks like the most famous tool was the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management, followed by the GSOC MRV protocol. Then Biofunk tool that, as I just commented, it's quite known in the region, and because CIRAD and IRD is using it in a number of projects they have in some countries here in Asia. Then we have Be Intact, very good. But also 7 people that didn't know about any of these tools before. Good. Let's have a look at the next question then. The next question is the following. Have you ever used the tools presented in this webinar? Of course, if you knew about them. So the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management, Biofunk tool, Be Intact, and the GSOC MRV protocol. So let's see if you knew about them, if you also happen to use them. I'm about to close the poll. Let's see. Okay, so it looks like you didn't use them. Eventually, if you knew about them and used them, the one that you used the most was the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management. And actually here it would have been interesting to have a feedback on its use, if you feel like sharing. So maybe we can identify areas for improvement eventually, as Carolina reported, no, that they are reviewing it. Also, 7 people use the GSOC MRV protocol, and 3 people use Biofunk tool, while Be Intact was used only by 2 people. Before moving to the next question, again, I would like to ask you if you feel like sharing. How was your experience in using these tools? Is there anything that you think needs to be improved? Or as some of you mentioned, maybe these tools are too complicated still or not very practical to use in the field? If you feel like giving any suggestions for improvement, please. You're welcome to do so either live or also by sending us an email. Because, yeah, 2 of these tools are under review, no? The Be Intact and the protocol, so it's good to know. Okay, let me ask you a third question, last one. So after attending this webinar and learning about these tools, would you use any of them or start using them more? And if so, which one would you use? The protocol, the Biofunk tool, Be Intact, the MRV protocol, or none of them? We didn't conquer you. Not impressed. And that's, as we said, like after this webinar, we will send you all the material. Zdravia, please send me the links to any additional training you have online so we can also share them with participants. You will have access to all email addresses of colleagues in charge of these tools, and you can send us any email anytime. We will try to support as much as we can. Okay, I'm about to close the poll. Let's see. Okay. So the winner is the protocol for the assessment of sustainable soil management. It's the one that people will start using the most. But also the Biofunk tool, Be Intact, also very good. And the GSOC MRV for fourth position. But also we have someone we didn't impress. So 4 people were not impressed. They will not start using these tools. Okay. But also in this case, because we really appreciate feedback. So can you please let us know, even with private means, why you would not use any of these tools? Maybe they don't fit your context, no? Their local situation. And if so, can you please tell us why, so that we can improve and maybe develop something that is better tailored to your needs? Ah, sorry, I didn't share the results. Okay, now you see. Okay, so as I said, please feel free to send out additional feedback by email. We would really welcome them. Okay, this was the last poll of the day that would also bring us to the closure of the webinar. So as long as anyone else do not feel like taking the floor, sharing experience or reflections or opinions on these tools, I would proceed with the closing the webinar. No one? Okay, then I proceed. So many thanks again to all of you for your active participation. I really hope that you enjoyed as much as we did when listening to you. And also many thanks to all speakers. Your interventions were very bold and we really appreciate the time you spent with us. So as I said, please do not hesitate to contact us in case of questions or need. And all presentation will be shared by email, and as well the video recording of the webinar will be made available online and shared by email for your further reference. Once again, I thank you all. I wish you a good rest of the day. And I ask you to please stay tuned because more webinars are coming for this year. And we really look forward for your active participation. So thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.